Yo, the enemy's public, I gotta keep my eyes open. Pay attention, stop walking around like you blindfolded. This not the World Cup, but Nasir be kicking knowledge. This is the type of information you can never learn in college. It's time to fight back, it's no more trying to play it cool. We got interviews, podcasts, and got the latest news. So sit back and relax, we about to get it started. Earth is a canvas, and guess who's the con artist? They brainwashing us, the system corrupted. You are now rocking with the enemy's public. You are now rocking with the enemy's public. I said you are now rocking with the enemy's public. Hey.
Peace. This is the enemy's public, and I am Bro.Nasir. This evening, we're going to go over the privately owned prisons, the ones who lobby to set up laws to line their pockets. Most penalties are established based on the necessities of the correction officers, the police officers, the judges, or what have you. Like 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years when you get caught with a pistol. When the Constitution say that we have the right to bear arms, but there's a penalty for being caught with a gun in certain states. 3 to 5 years you receive, and people are murdered for carrying guns also. And their justification is that he or she had a gun. Yet, 3 to 5 years is the time is to, you need to pay for a car. 20 years, 30 years, 25 years to life. That's usually a mortgage. And then, 10 years, the vehicle homicide, 10 years. And that's, they base these laws and these penalties on the necessities of the correction officers, the police officers. And if you are out of state driving through a state, they'll victimize you. They'll pull you over just to get money from you. So we have to be mindful of these states. In the prison industrial complex, I have a few videos that I want to show dealing with this situation, the prison industrial complex. And they also depend on crime to sustain their lives.
U.S. leaders moan incessantly about how other governments should treat their own people. America's moral superiority is routinely touted as why the U.S. is legitimate to intervene in the affairs of others around the world. Time and again, they pull out the human rights card to admonish the human rights abuses in other countries, justifying sanctions, bombing campaigns, or invasions to overthrow their governments. The U.S. is the most qualified to do this, of course, because it is the shining moral example for how society should be run. Yet 2.2 million people sit rotting in American jails, 7 million in the prison system, counting probation and parole, astronomically higher in absolute numbers and per capita than in any other country in the world. The U.S. has only 5% of the world's population, yet a stunning 25% of its prisoners, meaning 1 out of every 100 people in America is living behind bars. With a prison population so enormous in a country that's the global arbitrator of human rights, it must be leading with a great example of what prison should be. So what are...
Just imagine the United States wants to be the world police with the most people in prison, and they say putting police in certain cities and in certain areas of cities are stopping crime. or they use that as a remedy for crime when crime is still the same and sometimes crimes go up. Either the police are not doing their job, or the police, or, they're part of the problem, or the police are the criminals themselves.
What are conditions like in these so-called correctional facilities? Prisoners aren't just warehoused in the millions, they're packed on top of each other like animals. At the end of 2010, the Federal Bureau of Prisons was operating at 36% overcapacity on average. California prisons are 144% of capacity. In Alabama, the most overcrowded prison state, sits at 195% of capacity. In 2009, one prison in the heart of Dixie was overflowing at 319% of capacity. Even the Supreme Court has deemed prison overcrowding cruel and unusual punishment. Cramped conditions may be livable, but extreme temperatures are deadly. This year, a homeless veteran at Rikers Prison baked to death in a cell that exceeded 100 degrees. In Texas, at least 14 inmates have died due to extreme heat since 2007, with cells averaging 90 and reaching upwards of 130 degrees. Even the most basic human survival needs are choked.
Appreciate it.
Despite huge budgets, prisons strive to allocate only the minimum food required and of the lowest quality, spending about 1/3 feeding inmates what it should cost for a basic nutritional diet. In some cases, prisoners are literally starving.
Now just imagine, in New Jersey, private prisons and the prisons altogether. We know a lot of the prisons are privately owned, and they're receiving $40,000 per prisoner every year. Yet they won't take that $40,000+ and employ someone to keep them out of jail. Prison is big business, multi-billion-dollar business, and it's more prisons and people in prison in the United States than it is in China, India, Japan. When these three countries' back number, just imagine their back number is bigger than the United States total population. But the United States have the most people in prison.
According to the Southern Center for Human Rights, inmates in one Georgia jail are fed only 2 meager portions of food a day, up to 14 hours apart, resorting them to eat syrup packets, toothpaste, and toilet paper for sustenance. Even more disturbing are incidents like the one at Rikers this past March, where 22 prisoners became violently ill after eating meatloaf laced with rat poison. But prison is not just hell on earth for inmates. It's also hell for the families and loved ones of anyone incarcerated. Extreme difficulty in visiting prison aside, the system even makes talking near impossible. In addition to severe restrictions on communications, prisoners are also charged exorbitant dollar-a-minute fees. The telephone service providers kick back 42% of their massive revenue to the state, amounting to $152 million annually. 24 Texas jails.
They are capitalizing off prisoners coming and going. Now what they have in the prisons in the state of New Jersey, I don't know about anywhere else, but more than likely it's nationwide. They have this J-Pay thing going on where they allow the prisoners to have like the iPads and the Androids, and that's how the prisoners contact their family, through text. You can actually text your loved one while they're in prison. That's how you write them a letter, and you have to pay for the virtual stamps. You have to pay for virtual stamps to contact your loved one in prison. You can send pictures, you can send letters, but you have to pay for virtual stamps. And every time you send a letter, it cost.
Have already eliminated in-person visits altogether, replacing them with expensive video chat services. Incarcerated people are also subject to savage brutality from the only people from the outside they're allowed to see. Extreme violence from prison guards is widespread, although done hidden behind walls, knowing that their actions will rarely, if ever, be scrutinized. A survey at Clinton Correctional Facility found that 90% reported common physical assaults by staff for even the most minor infractions. The report also corroborates what others have found across the country, that people will be brutally beaten, thrown back in their cells without medical attention, and threatened with more violence if they seek medical attention. If wounds are too severe, it's no worry to the guard, because routinely the medical staff will cover up for them. In some cases, guards were even found to be forcing inmates to fight in gladiator-like tournaments.
Well, the most subtle form of brutality in the prison system is the denial of medical attention. Prisoners get hurt, prisoners need medicine. Sometimes the medicine is a week delayed, and a person might have high blood pressure and need to take the medicine on a daily basis. And it might take them a week, 2 weeks, or a month. It certainly damages organs. The most inexpensive healthcare providers are used. Anybody that can make the cost of healthcare for prisoners at the lowest, they get the contracts, and of course, it's very abusive.
It's not just physical violence. In 2014, the Bureau of Justice reported that prison guards account for half of all sexual assault allegations, and that it was extremely rare for any of them to go to trial for the accused crime. Of the guards who are caught sexually abusing prisoners, 1/3 are allowed to resign before the investigation concludes, eliminating any public record. One of the guards' most important jobs is making sure everyone's put to work, all day, every day, making pennies on the dollar for corporate America. The country's biggest corporations, McDonald's, Walmart, American Airlines, and others, line their pockets with outsourced prison labor to manufacture everything from food to furniture to staffing call centers.
Absolutely, big dog Philly OG. They do give prisoners experimental drugs, and it's forced on them. If they don't do it, something happened to them. They may get put in solitary, or they might not get their canteen, or what have you. They have ways of punishing them if they don't take their experimental drug.
Inmate workers' safety is outweighed by their utility to be used as corporate props, like when BP used prisoners to stage Gulf cleanup photos. State governments have also found ways to cut costs by replacing good-paying, sought-after careers with cheap prison labor. A stunning 30 to 40% of all California's firefighters are prisoners, making a measly $2 a day, or $2 an hour when on the line. Producing $2 billion in annual value, inmates are a hot commodity for corporate masters who only wish their minimum wage of 12 cents an hour could be applied to the entire nation. In America's prisons, lives are not just profit-making tools, they're also expendable. There is no humane way to kill someone, period. Realizing this, every other industrialized country in the world has banned the death penalty.
Thanks for coming through.
But exceptional America refuses to abandon this barbaric practice. The Wild West logic goes, if you kill someone, you deserve to die. But the murky truth reveals that 18 people facing the death penalty have been exonerated through DNA evidence since 1989. According to the proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences, at least 1 in 25 inmates on death row are innocent. There's more than one way to kill a man who's locked up. After America's torture became public record, U.S. leaders have vowed to ban it for good. Again. But the empire regularly tortures people every day within its own borders. See, empires used to torture their prisoners in underground dark dungeons. Yet over a century later, they're tortured just the same, in sanitized bright boxes. Imagine the quality of life spent inside a windowless, concrete, 6 by 9 foot cell for 23 hours a day, for years on end. in a room no bigger than a king-size mattress. The only human interaction you have
That is cruel and unusual punishment, and only a demon could do such a thing.
is with the guard who slips you food through a slit. At Red Onion State Prison,
Peace to my brother,
75%
the
of
realest
inmates
McCoy.
are on
Thank you for
23-hour
coming through,
lockdown in
brother.
tiny cells for an average of 3 years. In Texas, inmates placed in solitary have to earn their way back to the general prison population, spending on average 5 years in isolation. This kind of detachment has devastating psychological impacts. Not only does it exacerbate mental illness, in many cases, perfectly healthy prisoners develop extreme psychological disorders as a result. According to the ACLU, people subjected to solitary confinement exhibit a variety of negative physiological reactions, including hypersensitivity.
Just say somebody goes to prison for vehicle homicide, they was driving drunk, or, they killed somebody doing that. It doesn't make that person a criminal. Yet, if they go to prison and they are subjected to what is in prison, the cruel and unusual punishment. Now the officers there, it's their job to maintain the safety of the prisoners, and the punishment for the crime is being there. Yet the officers feel like they have to punish the people for their crimes that they did. Now, the prisoner was tried, convicted, and being in prison is their punishment. They don't have to be further punished by people who are paid by the taxpayers to maintain the safety of the prisoners. Now, these guards are into very barbaric things in these prisoners. They really think they're supposed to punish people, and some of them they use their so-called perceived power to punish prisoners. When a prisoner, a lot of times you have the model prisoner, if there's any such thing of that, who just going to do their time, and the guard will make trouble for the prisoners.
Hallucinations, increased anxiety and nervousness, lack of impulse control, severe and chronic depression, appetite loss and weight loss,
Peace to Anthony
heart
Lowe.
palpitations,
Thanks for coming
talking
through.
to oneself, problems sleeping, confusing thought processes, self-mutilation, lower levels of brain function, including a decline in EEG activity after only 7 days in solitary. Yet the U.S. loves to use it, despite international human rights bodies widely recognizing.
Can you imagine the toilet you urinate and defecate, and the sink where you get water is attached to that right behind it? Can you imagine that? That's how they do the people. And the United States want to be the standard bearer of humanity when they treat their citizens worse than anybody do on this planet, or just as bad. But they want to be the standard bearers of humanity.
In the practice as torture. Often we hear that the people in prison are violent criminals who need to be locked away to keep the country safe. But when you take a look at who's actually behind bars, a much more disturbing reality begins to unfold. Despite lecturing the world about the inexcusable offense of holding political prisoners, the U.S. has its own stockpile of them. Thousands of political activists were imprisoned during COINTELPRO, and from its inception until today, the U.S. continues to unjustly arrest political leaders to silence them.
There's a lot. The numbers vary, but some people agree that it's around 200. But in terms of Black Panther Party members, which I was one, there's probably almost 24 prisoners. But there's Native Americans, there's Puerto Ricans, there's European organizers, and then now today, the environmentalists and other people that have been organizing for the last 2 or 3 decades have also joined the ranks of political prisoners. Well, it's very difficult to organize in prisons. It's easier to engage in negative activity. Once you start organizing, there's a concerted effort by prison officials to transfer you, to get you out of prison. They move you around, they harass you, they find ways in which to put you on lockup to keep you in solitary confinement. Uh, they will remove all your books. They will constantly shake your cell down. So organizing in the prison is a very difficult task for a lot of young people once they develop a consciousness and a sense of awareness, or once they just decide they don't want to be treated as animals, they endure the hardships that's involved.
Beyond targeting activists, masses of average Americans like you and me are wrapped up in the albatross of prison. With the prison population skyrocketing over the last several decades, you would think it would correlate to the level of crime, but the opposite is true. Crime has actually dropped dramatically over the past 25 years, while numbers sent to prison have increased at an inverse rate. The bursting prison population also carries heavy examples of institutional racism in America. Despite making up only 12% of the population, African Americans constitute 39% of the prison population. The facts are irrefutable. If you're Black or Latino, you are more likely to be sentenced to prison than your white counterparts.
Let them tell it. We commit the most crimes, our people, yet we had a man who was running for president tell us while he was campaigning, and some of our people, the ignorant among us, went out and voted for him. They have a stiffer penalty for crack cocaine, which is stepped on, than pure cocaine, based on, based on the status, because crack cocaine are for poor people and pure cocaine is for people who have money. But the people who have money will get a slap on the wrist, but the people who are selling crack or even doing crack get a stiffer penalty. And these laws was written, the war on drugs were actually the war of drugs, and they have declared war on our people.
In fact, African American men are 7 times more likely, Latino men 3 times more likely to go to prison than a white man. Among federal defendants, Black men receive 20% longer sentences than white counterparts committing the same crimes with similar records.
512.
And what great threat do these people pose to society that warrants them being locked away in federal penitentiaries, mostly using drugs? Over 50% serving time in federal prison are non-violent, drug-related offenders, and since 1998 have constituted the largest portion fed into federal prison. Between 2012 and 2013, 28% of drug offenders had charges related to marijuana only. But on top of throwing people in cells for victimless crimes, the state has also ensured a way to throw minor offenders away forever. Thanks to draconian 3 strikes laws, there are currently at least 3,278 people serving life without parole for nonviolent crimes.
You can thank Christy Todd Whitman, one of the authors of that bill that became a law, the 3 strikes law. Christy Todd Whitman, former governor of New Jersey. She's one of the people who authored that law.
Some of them as absurd as shoplifting to jacking a wallet. In a tragic 79% of these cases, where people's lives are trapped in the system forever, involve non-violent drug offenses. The U.S. prison system doesn't just illustrate white supremacy embedded in the empire, but patriarchy too. One California prison study found that of all the women behind bars for killing their significant other, 93% were abused by that person, and 67% killed their significant other while defending themselves and their children from life-threatening attacks from their abuser. Self-defense, even without a victim, is punished. In the case of Marissa Alexander, the victim of repeated abuse was given 20 years in prison for simply firing a warning shot in the air while her abuser was trying to kill her. After public outcry won her an appeal.
That's what they do to our sisters. The sister fired a warning shot, telling dude to back up off her. Simple. They tried to give this sister 23 years for that. I remember this.
The prosecutor tried to increase the sentence to 60 years. Then there's the refusal to recognize the existence and rights of trans women by misgendering them, therefore placing them in extreme danger. In general, 4% report sexual abuse while in prison. But that number shoots to 59% for trans women. Harrowing stats aside, the empire defends mass incarceration with the mantra that those in prison are there by their own doing. We all make our own decisions. But what about those who can't? In the belly of the empire, how are the most vulnerable treated? Including people medically deemed unable to care for themselves. People with debilitating mental illness like bipolar, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, and more. They're discarded, thrown on the streets, and punished in cells. In testimony before Congress in 2010, Ohio Governor Ted Strickland estimated upwards of 40% of mentally ill people in America become wrapped up in the criminal justice system. Right now, there are 10 times as many people with mental illness in prison than in hospital care. The trend of mental illness is startlingly high across the board. In federal prison, inmates with diagnosed mental health issues consist of 45% of the population. In state prisons, it's even higher, 56%, and a whopping 64% of inmates have mental illness in local jails. But this cruelty and neglect isn't just endured by mentally ill adults. It's extended to the even more vulnerable, children. For example, the Arizona Department of Juvenile Corrections estimates 35% of jailed youth suffer mental illness.
They really need to start, checking out the people they hire as correction officers, because a lot of them, with their behavior, a lot of them are mentally ill, and a lot of them was just outright evil with the way they do things. How they treat the prisoners and how they feed them. They do a lot of vindictive things to the prisoners. And if they find out somebody's about to go home, they'll try to get them in trouble to keep them from going home. It's just crazy.
With 50% on psychotropic drugs. However, the mentally ill aren't just left to languish in prison. They're also executed. Since 1983, at least 60 people with mental illness or retardation have been killed by the state. The system has been shown to be stacked against poor people, regardless of race. Even though drug use is comparable, police aren't looking for drugs in Beverly Hills. Poor neighborhoods are the most heavily policed and the most routinely harassed. And once you're arrested, you only get the best justice money can buy.
Poor people don't have boats. Poor people don't have airplanes. As a matter of fact, most poor people don't have any form of transportation to transport drugs into our communities.
A great secret of this so-called justice system is that the right to be tried before a jury of their peers is hardly the norm. Most are pressured by fear and coercion to take plea deals, told they're going to be found guilty anyway. More than 90% of criminal cases are never tried before a jury.
That's exactly why I say the enemy's public. Anybody who's supposed to be a public servant to us, they serve to our detriment. They don't serve us. They serve the agency, public defenders. They're supposed to be a court-appointed lawyer, but they try to get people to take pleas because they don't want to go out and defend someone because they're not getting paid. So they don't want to go out and defend someone. They want you to go in, take a plea, and go to prison. All these public servants, so-called public servants, are the enemy's public, period.
Others go to jail not for jailable offenses, but for the inability to pay fines and court fees. A 2010 Brennan Center report found that of the 15 states with the largest prison populations, all had a practice of arresting people because they were unable to afford fines. For example, Ferguson's nearly all-white police force pull over African Americans en masse and slap them with expensive tickets, whether or not they commit.
Now, that's a crime in itself. When it's a city or territory where it's mostly our people and the vast majority of police officers or any type of law enforcement are Caucasian, they should not be policing our people. They shouldn't be nowhere near our people. First, there's no genuine concern for the people. No one should police anywhere where there's no genuine concern. White police officers should be where their people at, because there's different cultures. They're not going to care about the people, and they just shouldn't be around us trying to police us and so-called serve us, because they're not going to serve us. They're around people they don't like, so they're going to treat them bad.
Traffic violations. Unable to pay, residents are sent into the pipeline of the prison system for 2 weeks or more. In 2013, the city issued 33,000 arrest warrants for unpaid traffic tickets. Ferguson has a population of 21,000. Many remain in the system because they can't afford bail. Like Khalif Broder, who sat in jail for 3 long years for the crime of stealing a backpack at age 16 because he was unable to pay the $3,000 bail. He ended up committing suicide as a result of abuse. At Rikers, an insane 40% of inmates are there because they cannot afford to make bail. But at least the system throws the gauntlet down on all crimes equally. Actually, if you have money, you can get away with pretty much anything. Robert Richards IV, billionaire heir to the DuPont fortune, found guilty in 2009 of raping his 3-year-old daughter. How many years in prison did he receive for this heinous offense? None. The judge.
Now, he shouldn't even be allowed to walk among people after doing that. Not only should he be in prison for the rest of his life, he shouldn't be able to walk among us breathing after committing such a heinous act on a child.
Said he, quote, wouldn't fare well in prison. Let him go home on probation instead. Beyond individuals, though, an entire clique is exempt from prosecution. Bank of America, Western Union, JP Morgan Chase, and HSBC are known to be laundering billions in drug money for cartels in Mexico, while millions of poor people are funneled in and out of the prison system for possession of small amounts of drugs. Banks openly engage in flagrant criminal drug activity to the point of making the drug trade possible without fear of any real punishment.
The drug lobbyists, those who lobby to keep people in prison for drugs or have people in prison for drugs, do the most drugs. They have the most access to drugs, the most connections, and they do more drugs than anybody.
Racism and inequality in the justice system don't happen in a vacuum. The economic function American prisons serve cannot be overlooked when we want to understand how the freest country on earth ended up with the most prisoners. I sat down.
Now, if you're in a cell with someone and you're both in that cell for 23 hours a day, just imagine 23 hours a day. There's cruel and unusual punishment already. And then if this dude has to go to the bathroom, you got to smell his ass. Even if you're eating, you got to smell his ass because you're locked up in a cell with him for 23 hours. That is cruel and unusual punishment, and it's just outright wicked to subject anybody to that.
Sat down with Eugene Puryear, author of Shackled and Chained, to talk about the roots of mass incarceration and how it evolved in U.S. society.
But I think that what we have to understand about prisons in the United States is that they're ultimately a form of social control. They're an element that exists as a broader part of the economy that helps discipline the labor force. And so when you think about slavery, for instance, and the things that came after it, it's sort of a three-step process for the African American population in particular in America. So on the one hand, you have Africans who are brought here, amalgamated from a number of different ethnicities, peoples, nations, so on and so forth, molded into one people. And really, when you look at the development of the prison system in America, in the South, prisons were very underdeveloped because primarily slavery was the institution that was used to control labor, to control where people were living, where they went, how they traveled, the security system, the patrollers, sometimes called paddy rollers at that time, that were all policing the population that existed at that time. That was the primary labor force, the servile labor force. Then following the end of slavery, what you have after a brief flourishing of Reconstruction is this new system called Jim Crow. And Jim Crow used things like convict leasing, which was a small amount of the individual in terms of the individuals who were involved, but in terms of the role that it played, it was for
Convict leasing is when we see convicts cleaning up the streets, on state highways or building something. That's convict leasing, when they're leased out to private entities by the state. They get money for it. As a matter of fact, everybody in that system is under contract. The people who serve the food, the prison guards are under contract. Even the medical people are under contract. And they bid for these contracts. And whoever, especially when it comes to the food and the medical, whoever bid the lowest gets the contract, because they really don't want to give prisoners medical attention, and they damn sure don't want to feed them. They feed them slop, and they give them inadequate health care.
For African Americans who were still needed to be this major agricultural labor force, cotton, indigo, so on and so forth, that really was the pivot of the world capitalist economy. They couldn't just have people going wherever they wanted, leaving the plantation, doing whatever they can do. So on the one hand, you see that there's no land reform during Reconstruction. On the other hand, that you see that the laws that were getting people swept up into this convict leasing were primarily around quote unquote vagrancy or things of that nature. Essentially, if you weren't employed or people thought you were doing something suspicious, you could be picked up and thrown into these labor gangs that existed, that were, in the mines primarily, also in the railroads, and a lot of the new industry in the South. And so you can see that the role of convict leasing, which was the early development of the prison system as such in the southern part of the country, is almost 100% aimed towards controlling labor. And when we look at our current system of mass incarceration, we have to look at the fact that at the same time you see prisons exploding, you see a big changeover that's happening in terms of the economy in America, and mass incarceration, militarized policing, and things of that nature become an institution that is existing as a band-aid, because you've already decided we're going to economically devastate communities. And instead of doing things that are going to help people, what we have to do is ring fence and control the social conditions that are arising from this, that create a number of different problems.
Eugene, in your book, you say that, quote, sections of the population have been rendered superfluous to the normal productive process. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant by that is when you see what's happening with this economic crisis, the question is, what is the answer going to be? And so not only do you start to blame poor people more for the problem and cut back on social programs and the like, but to restore the rate of profit, what the capitalist class, the ruling class, the 1%, whatever you want to call them, in this country decided to do was globalize the chain of production and start to move factories, the so-called runaway factory movement, first to the South and the so-called Sun Belt, the Southwest California, where labor was cheaper, and more importantly, where labor laws were completely weakened. And then after that, onto Latin America, onto Asia, and the process that many of us know as quote unquote globalization was really a search for the cheapest possible form of labor to reduce the cost to increase the rate of profit. And so not only do you have jobs moving away in the general sense, but you have a rise in structural unemployment that is having a huge effect. And if people look at, for example, the employment to population ratio, which is really the best way to look at how many people are employed, it's very interesting to look at the peak level, which starts in 1979, and you start to see it just steadily going down till today. And I think that's a powerful statement about the fact that not only are jobs leaving, but we need fewer people to work. And so what you have is a whole population of people that you've said, okay, we told you that we were going to integrate you into the economy, Black people, the same way we did Irish and Italians, but we're not going to do that. We're going to send these jobs somewhere else. And on the same token, we're also not going to provide a lot of social programs and things of that nature. So you have a whole population of people who are existing in this area who aren't really needed in the production process besides how they become used in the low-wage workforce, but they're still there. And these are the exact same communities that just 20 years previously, if we're talking, say, 1980, had risen up in this mass uprising that had happened in these major northern cities. When you look at the wave of major drug epidemics in America, let's just speak about crack cocaine. Crack cocaine really comes on the scene at the depth of the economic crisis of the early 1980s that really was devastating to Black communities across this country. And so you see when people have no hope, when they see no future, and then they're driven to look for more and more ways to escape. And when you start to have the explosion of this Black market economy, all the other social consequences that exist from this social devastation, you have to find some way to contain it if you aren't going to solve it.
And talk about the mandatory minimums and three strikes laws. What forces were behind these and what damage did they do?
Well, it's an interesting question. So you see a number of Democrats, so-called liberals, start to reach for these conservative solutions that speak to punitive type things. Well, if the problem isn't the government institutions, if the problem is these poor people, we need to start to look for punitive measures that can change their behavior. And so they start to push mandatory minimums, but it doesn't become a big thing until the war on drugs. And what you see then is the connection between the two. They were pushing mandatory minimums before the war on drugs. The war on drugs became the kindling on the fire. This issue of social control is very clear. They're making the laws and organizing them in a way that is deliberately aimed at putting people in a certain geographic area, which are racially and class exclusive, Black poor people, putting them in the noose and sweeping them into the prison system.
Conditions in the empire's prisons have always been horrific. And people incarcerated, along with their supporters on the outside, have always organized together to change them. In 1971, the Attica uprising in San Quentin prison forced the government and prison authorities to take the prisoners' demands seriously and succeeded in winning real reforms. Despite the fact that the fascist-like prison forces sent their foot soldiers to wantonly slaughter 29 prison organizers, with so little care that they also killed 10 hostages in the massacre, the Attica Rebellion lit a fire that has never gone out. And 2013 saw the biggest prison strike possibly in world history, where tens of thousands of California inmates came together to protest poor nutrition, torturous use of solitary confinement, and more. In less than a week, the strike spread to 20.
I actually think that being in a cell 23 hours is torturous. I think that's cruel and unusual punishment, being in the cell 23 hours.
4 state prisons and 4 out-of-state contract facilities where inmates refuse to eat, perform work assignments, or attend required classes. As a result, state lawmakers were forced to hold public hearings on conditions in maximum security prisons and the prevalent use of solitary confinement. Hope can come from such an ugly disease. The empire has exposed that these structures exist for nothing but to maintain its power and wealth, while wasting the potential of so many millions of human beings, so many young people, so many in need who deserve to be part of society. If prisoners under the most severe repression can organize coordinated political actions across more than a dozen high-security prisons, imagine what we can do on the outside to build solidarity to end mass incarceration. The fact that history's biggest empire also has history's biggest prison.
Marcel also thought Danny Green was around.
I don't know how those videos ended up in my feed, but that's not what I was looking for. What I was looking for is a group that was in East Jersey State Prison called the Lifers Group. They had a song out back in the 90s. They was allowed to record a song in the 90s. And I want to play it if I can find it, which I'm sure I could. Just give me a second and I'll find it.
Go from there to their own story. If you listen to the record, the person who was saying at that particular time is explaining something that took place in his life.
I'm still part of the problem, but now I want to be a part of the solution. That's what makes me different from a lot of guys.
So that they can see this ain't no bullshit. This ain't no lie. We never try to glorify kids. We don't want no kid to get in his mind that you come to Rawway State Prison, you come to any prison in that matter, and you'll become a rat star, because it's not like that.
Every night they make noise, trouble and turn out, running the block while others can walk. He was known for the trouble child, jetting through the halls, writing on the walls.
Projects and getting behind the exits. Now he's all geeked out, ready for a shootout. His man hits him off with a faux, good looking out. But it's not enough, I need some extra clips. What you gonna do? Don't worry, I got this. Shorty stepped off, went where he had to go. Came up and creeped behind some buildings real slow. He was about to make his move, then he heard a sound. Shh. Put the gun down. So he did, turned around, so the kid he was riffing with thought to himself, oh shit, that was the end of his wannabe gangster dreams. Shorty died at 14.
Gotta get paid, cause life's too short. I'm not a prankster, I'm a motherfucking gangster. You step in the cell and I shake. You take your kicks, the same thing. Yeah.
I used to hang out on the streets and then I think a lot. And it's all over to my mom, you know what you talk about. I said she really tried to teach me, but I won't be taught. And every time she tried to discipline me, yo, it's fraud. So when I turned 16, I headed out the door. Cause all that bullshit, she was stressed, I could not take no more. I thought $2 this a gun, I found out most my friends. Because I paid the purpose, focus for the latest trend. I put a trigger on a nigga who was too far bigger. I brought a slug and it's smoking through one in the river. And now I'm living in a cell, which is 2 or 4. Receiving wall, big water, still iron doors.
Gotta get paid, cause life's too short. I'm not a prankster, I'm a motherfucking gangster. You step in the cell and I shake. You take your kicks and say thank you. You gotta get paid, cause life's too short. I'm not a prankster, I'm a motherfucking gangster. You step in the cell and I shake. You take your kicks and say thank you.
From the age of 10, that's when my life become begin. Now that I'm 22, it's over and I'm all in. Back on the block, I was a hood and a villain. Stick up. There goes that kid again, illin'. I sold drugs, hung with thugs, carry guns for kicks. Now I'm down on a 12 with a 4-step. I'm an outlaw, trip, call me justice. The wrong one for you to try to fuck with. I'm a nice kid, young nigga who don't play. I'm from N-E-W-A-R-K. Born an outcast, but many are outlast. Get out of line and get burnt up real fast. I'm not a gangster that don't need the best. I'm rougher than Frank Nitty, sharper than Elliot Ness. Gangsta Chronicle, shooter Ben Capone. In other words, I'm just bad to the bone.
But life's too short, I'm not a prankster, I'm a motherfucking gangster. You step in the cell and I shake. You take your kicks and say thank you. Gotta get paid, cause life's too short. I'm not a prankster, I'm a motherfucking gangster. You step in the cell and I shake. You take your kicks and say thank you. Yeah.
You can't fool me. I'm a gang flipper. You motherfuckers got a shot. Use it. This ain't no tough.
We're doing 25 to life, 35 to life. We're favorites, man. Blacks and Hispanics represent the majority in every motherfucking prison you go to. At least 90%. Suppose he take his time and don't want to bleed. You gonna die. Prison ain't no place to be. Don't come in here. Listen, if you like some of the guys you heard, like some of the things you heard, call us, man. Don't wait till you get it.
East Jersey State Prison, the former Rahway State Prison in New Jersey, who originated Scared Straight. A lot of films were filmed there. When Malcolm X, when they were filming Malcolm X there, when Malcolm X was in prison, it was filmed there. Locked Up was filmed there. Hurricane was filmed there. As a matter of fact, the real Hurricane was in prison there. You know, it's a famous prison, and a lot of films were filmed there. You know, when they do films, they'll come to East Jersey State Prison to film those prison movies. Yet prison is big business. Big business. Trying to find this other video. Prison is big business, and it sustained the lives of those who work there, and those who own it. It sustained their lives. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna play this video right here. The history of Rahway State Prison, the prison I was just showing you. Let me find it. Go to the library. As a matter of fact, I'll go to the watch later. There's some other videos that I want to show. How prisons profit off the war of crime. In which they do. They want us to believe that men in funny looking uniforms are the good guys when they are the worst people, because they have perceived power and they want people to obey them. And if you don't obey them, they want to give you this. They want to give you this this talk. Who makes money from private prisons? That's what we want to deal with. Who makes money from private prisons?
The privatization of prisons and detention centers has been a source of debate for over 3 decades. There have to be some things in our society that we agree are not a business opportunity.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with profiting off of anything. The question is, Are you providing a service with quality, with humane conditions, and so on?
The moral imperative of government should be to deliver the best outcome.
The U.S. privatized parts of its state and federal corrections and detention facilities in the 1980s. Two companies in particular, CoreCivic and Geo Group, have dominated the industry. But the uncertainty of a highly polarized industry stems mainly from the political climate. At the end of President Obama's second term, then Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates announced that the administration would phase out private prisons. CoreCivic and Geo stocks plummeted. 2 months later, President Trump was elected and the stocks soared.
There has been political sensitivity in our stock. It's unfortunate, but our focus continues to be operations. That's what we can control. We can't control the political dynamic.
But lately, things have taken a deeper turn. Democratic candidates call for a total abolition. A number of states have or could be banning the industry, and Wall Street is divesting. On top of it all, prison populations are decreasing.
That's a huge indictment.
Despite all the noise in the market, companies have very good liquidity.
How a company is structured on its balance sheet does not save it from a cultural revolution.
Well, I don't know if it's a breaking point or a time of change, but I think it presents, again, an opportunity for us to be more transparent about what we do.
Could this be the beginning of the end for private prisons? At the height of the war on drugs and tough on crime era, the country began imprisoning more people than ever. 750,000 people were incarcerated in America. By 1997, 1.7
he who
million.
enlightens.
With the growing prison population, so
I'll
were the
vote too
costs
for
of
anybody
operating
who's with
prisons.
doing that.
From 1980 to 1994, operating costs of state and federal prisons went from $3 million to nearly $18 million. Overcrowding was becoming increasingly problematic, and the government couldn't keep up. Private prisons were established to help
Peace to
maintain
my brother
the
Rob
$10 billion
Orr,
industry.
and peace to
Private prison
Metalface.
companies
Thanks for
could
coming
build
through, family.
facilities faster without voter approval. They also claimed they could provide a higher quality at a lower price. But the accuracy of that claim has been under scrutiny. No compelling government study is conclusive one way or another. In 1996, the General Accounting Office stated that they were not able to conclude that privatization saved money. A Department of Justice study from 2001 claimed that the average savings from privatization was only about
Absolutely,
1%,
Carbon King.
and not the
Absolutely,
projected
brother.
20%.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of accounting details that make it difficult to properly compare the cost between public and private. And actually, there are a lot of factors that make it difficult to compare quality.
The private prison model was simple: build and manage buildings and secure government contracts. Charge a daily fee for each bed you fill, something called per diem, or what is commonly referred to as mandates. In 1987, Corrections Corporation of America, CCA, today called CoreCivic, charged $32.17 per inmate. By 1997, it charged the government 33% more. However, the company's cost only increased by about 8%. The company's revenue grew 27 times. Brian Evans is the CFO of Geo Group.
So where do I look? At the camera or?
About 2/3 of Geo Group's revenue comes from federal and state corrections and detention contracts. ICE contracts make up a fifth.
Our business changed over the years. In 2003, the chairman and CEO, the founder of the company, George Zoli, had a directive at that time to expand the company into other service lines, diversify, if you will, and to own and and operate more of the facilities. So that process started in about 2003. We were about 500 million in revenue. Today we're about 2.5 billion in revenue. Some of that growth has been through acquisitions, about half of it through acquisitions, and about half of it through organic growth, new contracts, new facilities, et cetera.
Won't let it bring us any hurt or harm or danger. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
In November 2019, CNBC visited a GEO Group prison in Florida. Access to prisons for journalists is unusual, but GEO was able to grant us access with state approval within a week.
We advocated on your behalf to be here because we want you to be here. And we like for people to come here and see what goes on, hopefully to change their minds.
South Bay Correctional Facility is owned by the state of Florida, but has been managed by GEO since since 2009, a contract worth $356 million for 11 years. It houses nearly 2,000 inmates that are incarcerated for a variety of crimes, ranging from low-level charges to felonies. GEO is paid $51.11 per inmate, or man day.
What do they do? What do they use?
South Bay offers a number of educational, vocational, and substance abuse programs, many of which are mandated by the state.
Socially work, school, friends, you rate yourself for the 8.
In 2015, GEO launched its Continuum of Care program. It's an expansion of in-prison programs and includes post-release support. According to the contract, the state pays GEO around $3 million for COC at South Bay.
It was all about, okay, what's our role and responsibility? And that was to provide the most opportunities in making sure that we did everything we could to provide the rehabilitative services. So after they left, they wouldn't come back.
Sean Killian was convicted of murder when he was 21 years old. He's 35 now. He's been at South Bay since 2011.
When you're in state-run facilities, if you have longer than a 5-year sentence, basically it's very difficult to get in programs. You know, they give priority to the guys that are about to get out, but at the same time, there's not a lot of programs offered. Here they have so many programs and everybody's encouraged to take part in them.
Between ICE, U.S. Marshals, Bureau of Prisons, and state, GEO manages about 70 facilities. We asked David Venturella how many of them look like this.
How many of them look like this? Well, I would say all of the facilities that we own either look like this or better. The ones that we manage, I would say say are pretty similar.
But the visit to South Bay is one side of the private prison story. Less than a month prior to the tour, an inmate was flown to a hospital after a stabbing. Geo Group, like CoreCivic and other private prison companies, have been plagued with litigation and claims of human rights abuses.
There's only two ways for a for-profit entity to create revenue. One is to increase your revenue basically by increasing your market share, and secondly, to cut costs. So to lower your expenses and therefore take home more profitability. And so if you're cutting costs when it comes to caring for humans, that's generally not going to put you in a good place.
Do bad things happen in a well?
I apologize for the technical difficulty. I have muted myself and I was speaking. I was speaking about 12-year-old Lionel Tate, who went to prison because he didn't have all his mental faculties. He was playing wrestling with a little girl, doing wrestling moves on her, and ended up killing her. They gave him life in prison without the eligibility of parole. Yet years later, they let him go. Mind you, he was 12 years old. By the time he was released from prison, they put him in prison, not juvie, in prison with grown men. They put him in prison, and when he was released, he had learned to be a criminal. So when they released him in 2004, he did an armed robbery, and now he's doing 30 years for that armed robbery. See, this is what prison do to you. If you're not a criminal, when you go to prison for whatever reason, you become a criminal because of your surroundings. And it's set up that way to make it a revolving door because these people don't want those buildings empty. They don't.
Well-run system, yes, they do. We don't try to cover it up, and we try to learn from that.
Peace to Mama Chula. Thanks for coming through.
The George Hill Correctional Facility in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, for example, was operated by GEO from 2002 to 2008. 12 inmates died at the facility during that time. They resumed control of the prison in 2017 when they acquired community education centers for $360 million.
This is a jail that has significant issues. We have had instances of wrongful death, suicides that have resulted in very large settlements with families. We've had issues with under maintenance that's resulted in, I wouldn't call dangerous, but certainly inhumane conditions, continuous understaffing issues.
Private prison companies occupy about 7% of the total state and federal correctional facilities market. That still produces billions of dollars in revenue. For detention, however, about 75% of total detainees are in private facilities. The funding of detention took off during President Obama's second term, coinciding with the increase in migrants from Central America.
The Senate bill, as currently written and is hitting the floor, would put in place the toughest border enforcement plan that America has ever seen.
Still, in August 2016, then Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates announced her plan to phase out private prisons under the Bureau of Prisons. She said that private prison companies compared poorly to public prisons, largely based on data from a damning OIG report that was published the same month.
I think the Inspector General cherry-picked some areas where we didn't match up as good with the BOP in those specific areas, but overall we had less grievances. We had better rates for inmate violence and assaults and things like that.
Overall grievances were higher in BOP prisons. However, the DOJ selected 8 categories of grievances deemed particularly relevant to safety and security. In that analysis, inmates in private prisons filed 24% more grievances. The stocks plummeted. The Yates announcement would only affect the revenue streams coming from the federal correctional system. Moody's saw enough risk and lowered their ratings.
We knew that they, from a liability and liquidity perspective, they were fine, but from a business perspective, we didn't know sort of what was going to happen after this. There was a lot of noise, and this was headline risk that we had always incorporated in our ratings, but this came to fruition.
It didn't come to fruition.
We need to find out all of these people, what they manufacture, what type of business they do, and just divest from whatever they produce. Because if they invest in prisons, we need to not do business with them at all. Whatever they produce and whatever they do besides prisons, if it's like a so-called essential, we need to go somewhere else to get that essential, because we don't need to do business and empower these people to do what they're doing as far as mass incarceration.
2 months later, Donald Trump was elected president, and within days of coming into office, Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinded the Yates memo. Stock prices soared.
Private prison companies were those that won the most the following day after the election.
The first year of the Trump administration, where things were going gangbusters for the industry.
Alan Zibble has studied the federal detention and corrections funding.
Trump has obviously been harsher in his treatment of immigrants, but it's really a continuation of a trend. Family detention started under Obama.
If you look at our record over the last 20 years, both under Republican and Democratic administrations, talking at the federal level, there's been steady growth of 5 to 7%, and that's because of the services that we provide and the quality of the services.
Campaign donations depict the industry favoring Republicans over Democrats. Core Civic and Geo Group each donated $250,000 to Trump's inaugural committee. Geo Group's contract revenue from ICE and U.S. Marshals is up by 43% from the last 2 years of President Obama to the first 2 years of the Trump administration. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the zero tolerance policy in April 2018. It was meant to ramp up the criminal prosecution of people entering the United States illegally. But images of separated families at the border and the detention of migrants under questionable conditions
Donald Trump! Donald Trump!
unleashed a firestorm.
The immigration policy under this particular administration really disturbed people. The administration lit a fire.
So we're keeping families together, and this will solve.
On June 20th, 2018, President Trump signed an executive order to halt the separation of families.
And it continues to be a zero tolerance.
By then, 3,000 children had already been separated from their parents.
Can you imagine that? They take the people's children and put them in intimate camps, separating them from their parents. These people are wicked as hell.
But it continued, and to this day...
You know what? Even worse about that, if you look at the vast majority of people who are doing border control, these people come over here and they turn their nose up at us when we made it so they can come over here in the first place. But if you look at the vast majority of border patrol, it's people trying to keep their own people from coming over here. Most border patrol are Mexicans, and they try to keep their own people from coming to America.
The exact number is unclear.
We had no role in operating the border facilities, which is where you saw a lot of pictures of overcrowded, inhumane.
Thank you, my brother, Big Dog Philly OG. I appreciate that, brother.
Conditions. Those aren't our facilities. They don't look anything like that. We also don't house unaccompanied minors.
Sparked by an outraged public, the Families Belong Together Coalition was formed. 250 organizations came together to protest, collect signatures, and raise awareness and money to help families reunite. But a few wanted more. Jen Armstrong co-authored a report that looked at who was profiting off of the detention of migrants, and private prisons were a part of it.
Something that is really key to understanding about private prisons is that they're actually structured as something called real estate investment trusts, or REITs, R-E-I-T-S. The interesting thing about this structure is that it actually allows these two companies to largely avoid paying income taxes. The flip side of that, however, is that they are actually required to pass on about 90% of their taxable income to investors in the form of dividends. And so they don't actually get to keep much cash on hand, which requires them to really wholly rely on a bunch of short-term borrowing for their operations, for any expansions that they want to do.
That's where Wall Street came in. By mid-2016, GEO had $1.9 billion in debt, and CoreCivic, then CCA, had $1.5 billion, and 6 banks largely financed it.
We know that private prisons make money when we're detaining more people during this immigration crisis, but what people don't see are this large syndicate of banks.
There goes that name, J.P. Morgan, Chase and Company. There goes that name. The name that benefited from the incident that happened yesterday, and the name that benefited from the sinking of the Titanic over 100 years ago. These people will move you out the way to get what you have and be in your position. They'll move you out the way any way they can because they got the money to make it happen.
Banks that are providing all the financing for all the operations for these companies, who are then also profiting through interest and fees and various income that they get from their financing relationships.
Activists took matters into their own hands. The coalition mass organized to urge the banks to divest. By March 2019, the group got their first win when J.P. Morgan announced they would no longer bank with the industry. 7 banks have followed suit.
It's actually 87.4% of all of the known financing for lines of credit and term loans for these two companies.
In June 2019, Elizabeth Warren published a statement that if elected, she will shut down the use of federal private detention facilities. Many other candidates have espoused similar intentions. Nevada and California signed into law bans that would eventually phase out private prisons. Colorado and Minnesota could soon. The largest pension fund in the country, the California Public Employees Retirement System, is divesting. So have a number of city pensions. In response, the stocks of GEO and CoreCivic have fallen by 30% since June 2019.
That's exactly what happens when you mass organize. And so when you have every Democratic presidential candidate saying, if I win, private prisons are abolished, that's not just about the candidates themselves. It's now a party stance. And in a two-party system, that business should be very concerned.
We redid our credit facility, which is about one.
The two-party system is only an illusion of a choice. They put people before us to give us an illusion of a choice. Yet we should not even participate in a system ran by wicked people. We've been saying it for months. We must divorce the system. We realize that it's a long process. It's going to take us to make up our mind what we want to do to change the dynamic and the condition of our people. It's going to take us to divorce the system and come together and pool our resources. We have too many resources to be in a system that mistreats us and don't want us. We have too many resources to engage in that.
$1.8 billion credit facility. We renewed that in June of this year. And most of the other banks participated in that process and renewed with us through 2024. So some of them since then have made public statements that they don't intend to renew in the future, but I think we'll just have to see how that plays out. We continue to dialogue with many of those banks. We dialogue with other institutions. We'll be able to access capital.
Fitch downgraded CoreCivic and changed its outlook to negative. They do not rate Geo Group. Moody's has not changed their rating since 2016.
There's a lot of headline risk, obviously, and despite all the noise in the market, companies have very good liquidity. For example, CoreCivic has one.
Do you recognize the accent of this guy that's talking? A lot of damn nerves.
Bond coming due next year, but they have enough. They have over 600 million in liquidity right now. Geo, they don't have anything due to 2023 either. Both of them are, their renewal, their retention rates so far, both of them are in the high 90s. They both reported earnings growth and what they call NOI growth, which is net operating income per the different contracts. They both have added, it's funny to say it this way, but they all have added people to their beds, or they call it heads in the beds. So from our perspective, we're very comfortable where our ratings are right now.
Hadan Seagram is an assistant professor of finance at NYU and has studied Geo Group and CoreCivic's balance sheets over a 5-year period.
The business is largely dependent on who's funding and who's in power rather than the fundamentals itself. Therefore, as long as this administration is willing to fund
Thank you,
them,
Carbon King.
they're going to
I
be doing
appreciate that,
well.
brother. Thank
Only
you.
issue with these
Appreciate
companies,
that
they
very
don't
much.
have enough debt financing for growth. So if they don't have that, and if the major banks pull out of it, like Bank of America, JPM, and Wells Fargo, they can be in a steady state, but they cannot grow as much as they want to.
Those concerns may be slowly vanishing. After failing to raise a $250 million term loan back in June, DebtWire reported on December 13, 2019, that CoreCivic was working with a Japanese investment bank to raise the money. Something activists have long feared could be happening.
Divestment is as much about the financial conversation and the financial impact as it is about shifting culture, shifting the narrative, and getting policy to reflect.
Behold, the great whore that sat upon many waters in the Hudson River. The great whore that sat upon many waters.
The values of the people. So regardless of how strong CoreCivic's and Geo Group's financials are, the culture can still eliminate them.
A lot can happen between now and when the financing terms mature for CoreCivic and Geo Group. While significantly more expensive, more foreign banks like Nomura can step in and fill the gap. An election can swing things dramatically, and the companies can continue to diversify their portfolios to protect themselves.
Set the children free!
All the while, the American public is more engaged than ever.
You can say, is it the beginning of the end, and does the end look like 2020? Maybe not. But whether the end is 2020 or the end is 2024, it's inevitable. It's coming.
The toss of a coin, pretty much.
Indeed. The prisons are, they depend on crime to sustain their lives. Peace to my brother, Dangerous, DVD Music. Before I go, I want to premiere. My son dropped the video this afternoon, and I want to premiere it before I go. And then I'm going to play some music, and I'm going to thank the family for coming through. Just know that I appreciate it very much that everybody came through to hang out with Brother Nasir. Now, where is it at? I'm gonna play this music by Dangerous and my brother Greedy Vegan first. I'm gonna play my son's video.
Fuck for a lion that talk to the sky. This shit up, bro. You can't get a slice of the pie. Bitch, this ain't a pizza. Tell me what it's like when you die. See you when I see you.
I'm from the old school shit, man. Like real talk, man. I'm an 80s baby and shit, man. I still do all the old school principles and shit. You know what I'm saying? Like real talk. But on some real shit though, man, let me get right to it though. Like real talk.
On this internet, niggas who talk, they be straight soft. Catch one of them niggas slipping and blow they face off. Real shit, do it myself. I never make calls. Bullshit, fire my gun till it been laid off. Imagine what it do to your dreads, my nigga, trust me. One shot, fuck up your locks like Puffy. Point blank, all you saw, how niggas moved in. Got your shit all on the walls, like school gyms. Shoulda be a movie when I step on the set. My chain glow, got me looking like a special effect. It hang low, when it shine, it be dripping respect. It gave hope to all them niggas that was wishing me death. You in the veggie state, coma, they ain't giving you hope. Cause your body's still alive, but it's missing your soul. This shit the Matrix, and no, it ain't no script for your role. Cause you ain't never pay attention to the glitch in the road.
Right, man, you try to play with me, Slim. You play with a nigga name.
This is so brilliantly put together.
Facade out there just like I'm some type of phony motherfucker. I'm some type of fraud nigga, some shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm one of them snake ass niggas or something like that, dude. I've been one of the most transparent niggas on YouTube, shit. Like real shit. I ain't never had a problem with coming on this motherfucker being my motherfucking self. Like real shit. I ain't never had a problem with coming on this motherfucker and being myself with no motherfucker bag and shit. I'm a nigga from the street, dog. I done did time and shit, dog. You think I'm gonna let a nigga on YouTube, on the internet and shit, paint a picture as if I'm a fraud ass nigga and shit? Like I'm some type of motherfucking sneaky ass nigga. Nah, I'm very transparent.
It's my brother, Dangerous Music, DBD Music, and the brother, Greedy Vegan, Talk Your Talk Media. Now I'm going to premiere my son's video that he dropped today. It's a freestyle.
Yo, all white white from head to toe. I never been a dirty nigga. Shorty from New York, she tryna kick it with a Jersey nigga. Eating good Spanish food, tacos with the enchilada, plantains, rice and beans, beef and chicken empanada. Kickstand with the self-timer on that chopper. Do that shit with no hands. Wasco dash, waka flocka. Put a motherfucker, let me switch my speed up. Stacking up my money, never fucking on my re-up. Hit it from the back now, fucking sure they weave. I'm cool with a lot of blood niggas, but the C's up. Fucking bulletproof, hit the nigga from the feet up. Sure they got the wet, fucking nigga, she's up. Twisted, get beat up. Iced out nigga, so I gotta keep the heat up. If we got beef, we can meet up. Know some real killers, they from Africa. Silencer up on the Glock, sound like a nigga playing Gallagher. I'm a champion, but a nigga just pulled up in the challenger. Every month I got a bunch of exes, I ain't talking about a fucking calendar. In other words, I'm a bachelor. When this beef, I'm flipping overseas like SpongeBob with the spatula. Spectacular from the passenger. First I aim the shit, then I clap it up. I bang the fifth, and then I pack them up. I'm a famous script, I'm about to wrap them up. Niggas whack as fuck. Let's kill me.
Peace to the family. I appreciate all the family for coming out and joining me this evening. We have to educate our people of who we dealing with, and yes, I got you, good brother. Dangerous. We have to teach our people who we're dealing with and not fall for these trick bags, because they want to get us in that system. And believe you me, it's a system. They don't want us to get out of. They want us to be in that revolving door, going in and out. And then what's crazy about us, about that, they charge us, the people, to be processed in the prison system. They charge, I know in New Jersey, they charge you $50 to be processed. They lock you up and charge you $50 to be processed. And if you don't have that money, if you do get money on your books, they're going to snatch that. If somebody come put $50 on your books and you didn't pay to get processed, they're snatching that. These people are wicked. And it's about them making money housing us in these prisons. So it takes us seconds to get ourselves in years of trouble. So we have to be mindful when we're dealing with each other, and we need to hold each other down. When I say hold each other down, I don't mean hold each other down as oppressing each other. We need to hold each other down as keeping each other, on our feet. As the brother Dangerous said, the network is coming, and we're going to display brotherhood and sisterhood. We're going to show people how it's done. The network is coming. The network is really here, but we just have to display it. That's all. I'm going to play another selection, and I'm going to thank the family for coming through. I love the brotherhood. That's one thing I love, the brotherhood. I'm not about no foolishness, but when I see that brothers want to get together and do something positive, I'm all for that. I support that, and I'm all for that. All I can say is let's do it. Let's go. And when I call you brother, that means I got you. If it happened to you, once I call you brother, if it happened to you, that means it already happened to me already. They got me because they was able to get to you. That's how I see it. They was able to get to you because they got me already. peace, love, honor, and the utmost respect for Mrs. The Enemy's Public, my better half. Just entered the building. Let me find something to play. So much talent in this community. Let me run this back. I want to run this back. I want to run this Jeep beat. I call this a Jeep beat. Supposed to play this real loud in a Jeep.
Let go. Let go. Let go. Cyphers. Shorty, yes, I'm an MC and let get it. Mommy wanna ride with him, let get it. Let go. Let get it. Let get it. Shorty, yes, I'm an MCM, let get it. Mommy wanna ride with him, let get it. 10, 20, 50 Benjamins, let's get it. Let get it. Let get it. Yeah. Once again, I'm out with the gang, let get it. Non-recession money ain't a thing, let get it. No time given to a lane, let get it. Let get it. Let get it. Shorty ass on my MCM, let get it. Mommy wanna ride with him, let get it. 10, 20, 50 Benjamins, let's get it. Money in my bank, chubby with the cake. Pull it out for haters cause they hate. Gotta fix your face. No gorilla in this train. Yeah, I'm about to take off lane. Get it through your brain. We will never hang.
Mommy Chula.
I don't do TikTok, my
Anthony
watch
Lowe.
is the same. Niggas like flip-flops, they sliding on game. You need a pit stop, get up off my wave. Rappers not this high, no, I don't see flame. No, they complaining cause they do it on my own. Got a lot of mouth, but I don't see you on. Why these niggas still fake for the gram? Getting used by the ops once again. You would never ever know. Never ever ever. I got mega weather flow. Mega weather flow. I got a mission to go. All I need is some
to the missus,
willing to
my
go.
wife, my better half.
Let get it.
Mrs. The Enemy's
Let
Public.
get it. Shorty ass on my MCM, let get it. Mommy wanna ride
know what
with
it
him,
is.
let get it. 10, 20, 50 Benjamins, let's get it. Let get it. Let get it. Yeah. Once again, I'm out with the gang, let get it. Non-recession money ain't a thing, let get it. No time given to a lane, let get it. Let get it. Let get it. Shorty ass on my MCM, let get it. Mommy wanna ride with him, let get it. 10, 20, 50 Benjamins, let's get it.
Salute to everybody. When you get a chance, the link is in the chat. Support my son's projects. He's good at what he do. Excellent at the editing. Excellent with the production. Good artist. And support him. Sub up to the channel. Sub up to the Enemy's Public. Let's get to 1K and beyond. Let's take everybody, 1K and beyond. Just know that Brother Nasir honors and respect his brothers and sisters. This is the Enemy's Public. I am Brother Nasir. Like, share, subscribe. Leave a comment in the comment section. I hope this information was informative, and enlightening. Peace.